Alright guys, so I have some absolutely horrifying updates here for y'all coming out of Gaza because in what is being dubbed the Week of Massacres, Israel has struck 5 different Gaza schools in just 1 week. So we're going to get to the details in this Al Jazeera article here, as well as some other updates that I have here for y'all, as well as probably one of, if not the single most infuriating interviews that I've ever seen in my life, where Joe Biden unironically claimed that he has done more for the Palestinian people than anybody. I'm not even kidding. He actually said that in a recent interview. So we're going to get to all of that. Let's go ahead and jump in here with the Al Jazeera article. They say Israel strikes 5 schools in a week of massacres. Israeli forces have attacked 5 separate schools in Gaza in just 8 days, killing dozens of people sheltering in them, according to Palestinian officials, medics, and rescuers. The latest attack on Sunday, just yesterday, struck the United Nations-run Abu Oriban school in the Nusayrat refugee camp, killing at least 17 people and injuring about 80. Most of the victims, shockingly, surprise, surprise here, guys, were women and children, right? Said the Palestinian Civil Defense, which is exactly how you could characterize the entirety of this now 9+ month long genocide. It has always been a vast majority of the people who they are killing that are women and children. They say Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud, reporting from Deir al-Balaz's Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, where some of those injured were brought, said that he encountered severely burned women and children crying out in pain and agony on the floor, and he says this is the result of incinerating bombs. The assault came after a deadlier strike hit tents near the entrance of Khan Yunis's Al-Adha school on July 9th, killing 29 people in just one strike. 2 days before that, another strike on the church-run Holy Family School in Gaza City killed 4 people. They say Israel has repeatedly attacked civilian buildings after accusing Palestinian fighters of using them for military purposes, but it has provided no proof for its claims, which is the standard operating procedure, right? They get to sit back and to claim, well, that residential building, that school, that hospital, that UN shelter, that refugee camp, it had a Hamas fighter in it, right? They were using it for military purposes without ever providing a lick of evidence for their case. So I'm not going to accept that at face value, with Israeli officials demonstrably proving themselves to be some of the most notorious liars on the face of the planet over the last 9 months and before that. Not exactly going to trust you guys at face value. They say campaigners have accused Israel of disproportionate use of force against civilians in Gaza. You don't say. They say more than 38,600 people, most of them women and children, have been killed in 9 months of relentless bombardment. And of course, we covered that Lancet report that came out where they were estimating that the number basically of civilians or people in Gaza that plausibly have been sentenced to death by Israel over the last 9 months is actually closer to like 180,000. That was their number. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking, the amount of death and destruction that people think is okay, that this has become so normalized, that Palestinians have become so dehumanized, that people don't even bat an eye at this anymore. They say on Saturday, Israel struck the Al-Mawasi area, which, of course, was designated as a safe zone by Israel, killing at least 90 people and injuring 300 others. So again, these are places that they have told Palestinians are safe zones. Safe zones. They have been continuing for 9 months straight now this game of genocidal musical chairs, telling Palestinians to go south, right? Leave Gaza City and go south to Khan Yunis. Then it was now you have to leave Khan Yunis and you have to go south even further to Rafah. Then you end up with over 1 million people stuffed into Rafah in essentially a giant open-air refugee camp. And then they go and they invade Rafah and displace almost 1 million people from this tiny strip of land. I mean, it's just, it is a joke. It is a joke for anybody to believe that this is some sort of reasonable, proportionate military action. It's not. These are the kinds of actions that you engage in if you're in the midst of a genocide. That's what this looks like. They got another quote here. Massacres every day, everywhere in Gaza, said the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. He says this is the result of Israel's impunity and international inaction. And he's 100% correct there. And of course, since launching the war on October 7th, Israel has hammered more than 400 schools in Gaza, which are among the few places that displaced Palestinians can turn to for shelter, and destroying 88% of all educational facilities. If you are on the pro-Israel side of this equation, if you think this is reasonable, I don't know what to tell you anymore. To look at a number like 88% of the educational facilities in Gaza have been destroyed, and to think that that's some sort of a targeted military operation against Hamas, in what world does that possibly make any sense? They continue with another helpful graphic down here just to remind us of the endless destruction that has been levied against Gaza. So 60% of the residential buildings have been damaged. That's a majority of residential structures in Gaza have been struck. 80% of commercial facilities, 267 places of worship, 88% of school buildings, 65% of road networks, and 13 of 35 hospitals partially functioning. And of course, there is still this blockade that Israel is not allowing adequate food or water or medical supplies into Gaza. And so even these like semi-partial, semi-operating, barely operating hospitals that remain, they don't have enough supplies. This is the clearest genocide that has ever happened throughout history. Now we also have this here. At the same time as Israel continues massacre after massacre after massacre, of course the US continues to be complicit in massacre after massacre after massacre. Here again from Al Jazeera, US resumes sending shipments of 500-pound bombs to Israel. 500-pound bombs. Now you guys tell me, you got a strip of land that's about 5 miles by 25 miles wide, population of just over 2 million, half the population is children, one of the most densely populated places on the face of the planet, and you're dropping 500-pound bombs. Does that seem like it's being used in a targeted way? Is it even physically possible to use a 500-pound bomb in a place like Gaza and have it be used in a targeted way? Of course not. These are the bombs that you use when you're engaging in an indiscriminate bombing campaign. That's what this is. But of course the US, eager to continue to be fully complicit in this genocide. Now we also have this because somehow it gets worse. Here from CNN. The US held off sanctioning this Israeli army unit despite evidence of abuses. They mean war crimes. Now its forces are shaping the fight in Gaza. So they're referring to this battalion, the Netza Yehuda Battalion, which is infamous even by Israel standards for being complicit in war crimes and human rights abuses against Palestinians, specifically more so prior to October 7th and in the West Bank. The US knew about this, right? This was one of these groups that we were even considering to sanction, which, think about how egregious your crimes have to be for the United States government to even consider levying sanctions against you. We decided not to do those sanctions. Saying, oh, they've been rehabilitated. It's a sick joke. And so we don't sanction them, and now many of those fighters from that battalion, again, that has even been condemned by the United States. Now those soldiers are rising up the ranks in the IDF and are now heavily involved in shaping what the IDF is doing in Gaza. One of the most egregious human rights abuses, right? Abusing groups in the IDF is now running the show in Gaza. I mean, it can't possibly get worse from this, right? It's like every single day, every single update that I look at when I'm keeping track of what's going on in Gaza, it somehow manages to outdo itself. Somehow it can always get worse. So what's the Biden response to this, right? We've known for a long time that the U.S. State Department, the Biden administration, is fully aware that the IDF has been engaging in widespread human rights abuses, widespread war crimes, indiscriminate bombing. In some cases, they've even used that terminology themselves. And yet, at the same time, we continue to send weapons to Israel, completely in contradiction not only of international law, because we're in the midst of being complicit in a genocide that is currently in the midst of being prosecuted at the International Court of Justice that we continue to smear, but on top of that, it's illegal under U.S. domestic law, through the Leahy law, for example, through the Foreign Assistance Act. So he's violating international and U.S. law in order to continue funding and arming a genocide. That's what's going on here. Now we get to the interview. Because if all of that didn't infuriate you enough, here we have Joe Biden claiming 9 months into this that he has done more for Palestinians than anybody. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip. This is, by the way, with Complex. Don't know why he did this interview. Don't know why this guy is up here asking the questions. No personal hate to him, but like, if you don't know the subject matter of what you're talking about, maybe you shouldn't do like a presidential interview. I don't know. Again, no hate personally to this guy. I'm sure he's like a nice guy off camera, but like, I don't know why he's even asking these questions if he's not equipped to push back on the answers. But let's just go ahead and jump into this.
And support for Israel has been unwavering. During the debate, you said that we are the biggest producer of support for Israel of anyone in the world. You also said that we're providing Israel with all the weapons they need and when they need them. Back in April, $26 billion in aid was sent or was approved to be sent to Israel. Why?
I said defensive weapons. I denied them offensive weapons that they were using, 2,000-pound bombs and the rest, because I made it real clear. They cannot use weapons that we provide them to, in fact, use in civilian areas.
I just want to pause on that for a second. Guys, there is no such thing as defensive weapons that are being used in Gaza. You know what a defensive weapon would look like? A defensive weapon is like the Iron Dome, for example, that can shoot rockets out of the sky that are flying over if Hamas shoots a rocket at Israel, right? That you could say plausibly is a defensive weapon. If you're sending 500-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs until very recently, if you are giving them this ammunition and this firepower, and they are dropping it on Gaza, again, 5 miles by 25 miles wide, 2 million people, half the population is children, one of the most densely populated places on the face of the planet, and they are using these bombs in Gaza, it is by definition not defensive. It cannot be defensive. Now, what he's doing is he's like reclassifying all of the weapons we're sending them to just be defensive because he thinks Israel is engaging in a defensive war against Hamas, when that's not what they're doing. They are in fact engaging in a collective punishment campaign on the entire civilian population in Gaza. That's what they're doing. So these weapons are not defensive in any way, shape, or form. You cannot possibly say that. Now, the other aspect of what he just said there is he says, well, I'm not sending them weapons that they're using on civilian areas. That's the only place they've been using it. That's literally the only places. They have, again, we just looked at some of the stats. They've destroyed the education system. They've destroyed the hospital system. They've attacked refugee camps and mosques and churches and residential buildings, UN shelters. Where in Gaza, that is a civilian area, has Israel not struck? There are no red lines for the IDF. There's certainly no red lines for you either. But to have the audacity to say, I'm not sending them weapons to use in civilian areas, that's literally all they're doing with the weapons. But he continues here.
And that's why I put together this plan.
My question, though, is why is your and United States at the current moment support for Israel so strong?
Look, Israel, if there weren't an Israel, every Jew in the world would be at risk.
What are we doing? He said this before. He said this multiple times before. You are the president of the United States of America. Guys, we have millions of Jewish people living in this country. It's your job to make sure that Jewish people are safe living here in the United States. And that goes for all other Western European governments anywhere, right? That Jewish people want to live. I think they should be able to live in peace and security, right? But you're going to say, as the president of the United States, Jews would not be safe anywhere in the world except for Israel. First off, that doesn't even make any sense because Jews are not safer in Israel than they are here in the United States. Number one, that's just factually inaccurate, right? And it's kind of this bizarre narrative that they want to do like dual narratives at the same time, right? Israel is simultaneously constantly under threat from all of its neighbors and facing complete obliteration from everyone surrounding them. But at the same time, it's the only safe place in the world for Jewish people. Pick one. Which one is it, right? But then it also doesn't make sense. Again, you are the president of the United States. Your job is to make sure that all Americans, Jewish, Christian, atheist, Muslim, whatever the case may be, are safe living here. Are you like planning on doing a Holocaust here? What possible reason would you have to say something like that? It's completely insane.
Every Jew in the world would be at risk. And so there's a need for it to be strong and a need for Israel to be able to have, after World War II, the ability for Jews to have a place that was their own. But you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And the Zionist is about whether or not Israel is a safe haven for Jews because of their history of how they've been persecuted.
Are you a Zionist?
Yes. Now, you'll be able to make a lot out of it because people don't know what a Zionist is. Do you know what a Zionist is?
I just ask questions, I don't answer.
By the way, I'm the guy that did...
Okay, so he's going to finish off here with the Palestinian comment. I don't know about you guys, but I find it to be extremely disgusting to use the Holocaust to justify what Israel is and has been doing to Palestinians. Here's what Zionism is, because Biden seems to think that the definition of Zionism is like Jewish people are safe in this region. That's not what it is. Zionism is a settler colonial project that, as an inherent foundational aspect of it, requires the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the native population there. This has been going on not only since 1948 with the Nakba, but well before that, into like the late 1800s, the 1880s, 1890s, is when this sort of started getting off the ground. Well before the Holocaust, by the way. But this has been a slow-rolling process of an ethnic cleansing of the local Palestinian population. That's what Zionism is. It is a settler colonial project. So he seems to not even understand what Zionism is, even though he's trying to educate this guy on what it is, I guess. But anyways, here we get to the worst aspect of all of this.
More for the Palestinian community than anybody. I'm the guy that opened up all the assets. I'm the guy that made sure that I got the Egyptians to open the border to let goods through, medicine and food but what's happening is, and I'm the guy that's been able to pull together the Arab states to agree to help the Palestinians with food and shelter. I'm the guy, and so it's not. I mean, I've been very supportive of the Palestinians. But Hamas are a bunch of thugs. Hamas is not worthy to. I was over there about 8 days after the massacre. Saw photographs of mothers and daughters being tied in a rope together, kerosene pouring on their head, and them burned to death. Nothing's happened like that since the Holocaust. And it's just not appropriate.
By the measure of your support for Israel, why would a Muslim or an Arab American vote for you for re-election?
The same reason why Arab Americans in the region support me. The same reason why, because it's the best way to keep peace, the best way to put things together.
Okay, so the man who is more directly responsible for more Palestinian deaths than arguably any American president throughout history is saying that he's actually done more for Palestinians than anybody else. And what's his explanation for that? His explanation, even though he's clearly senile, doesn't know where the fuck he is and should resign immediately in disgrace, his answer is essentially something something Egypt, something something aid, food, water, medical supplies, something something Arab states. That's basically what his answer was there. Could you guys make sense of that? I mean, basically, if I'm trying to read what he's saying here, first off, number one, there's not remotely close to enough aid getting into Gaza. There hasn't been for months and months and months. Meanwhile, you spent months and hundreds of millions of American dollars to build this bullshit floating pier that basically collapsed instantly and provided almost no aid to the Palestinian people. You have done absolutely nothing to pressure Israel to allow more aid to get into Gaza. They're the primary blockade, not Egypt. Israel is. Egypt hasn't been helpful in that regards by any stretch of the imagination, and they deserve some degree of blame as well. But first off, these are two U.S. allies. So that's what we're talking about here, right? But you have done nothing to meaningfully pressure Israel to allow more aid into the population that they are starving inside of Gaza. So it's not even true on that front. And then the secondary point that he's making is about bringing together the Arab states. Guys, basically what he's talking about is continuing with the Trump policy of like the Abraham Accords and trying to get a long-term security alliance between like Israel and Saudi Arabia and several other Gulf states, right? And remember, by the way, when he was criticizing Mohammed bin Salman for butchering and dismembering Jamal Khashoggi, right? The Washington Post journalist. Remember when he had like a mild criticism of that and then he went over and he did a fist bump with MBS, this brutal Saudi dictator? What happened to that? I thought we were supposed to be the freedom and democracy people, right? We're allied with an apartheid state in the midst of committing a genocide with our weapons, and then like a brutal theocratic monarchy that also, by the way, just a few years ago in Yemen, was also committing a genocide with our assistance, with our weapons. Like, these are our best friends in the region. Imagine believing that the United States of America cares about freedom and democracy around the world. No, not in any way, shape, or form. So, like, it's almost impossible to respond to this because it's just so out of touch with reality. Like, he genuinely believes in this moment right now, that he's the good guy. He's being generous to Palestinians in his mind. He's done well by them. Oh, sure, there are some, they've been indiscriminately bombing in some places, and there's too many civilian deaths, but I got that aid in. What the fuck are we doing, guys? Is this not just absolutely despicable? Despicable. We're talking about tens of thousands minimum, of innocent men, women, and children who have been brutally massacred. Again, complete destruction of the education system, complete destruction of the hospital system. Gaza has been rendered unlivable. It is the most intense bombing campaign in modern history, even if you compare it. What was it? I showed you guys that CNN report. The combined bombings of, like, Dresden and Hamburg and London during World War II still wouldn't match up to the amount that Israel has bombed this tiny little strip of Gaza. And he's acting like he's the good guy. He's acting like he's been generous to Palestinians. Jesus. I mean, absolutely unhinged, insane, psychopath kind of behavior. Now again, clearly in this interview, I mean, even just from that one clip, this man is lost. He does not know where he is. He does not know what he's talking about. He can barely string together coherent thoughts, which sort of just like adds another disturbing layer to this. And I'm not making that as like an excuse for him. If he was perfectly cogent, if he was perfectly mentally there, he'd still be doing the same shit. This is who he's always been. It's who he has always been. And I'll finish off with this. Because here, typically, as pointed out by Asal Rod, the comparison from the media in terms of how they cover this, right? This is why I bring you guys mostly like Al Jazeera articles and a few other ones sprinkled in there. But it's because we have headlines like this. I mean, here from the New York Times. They were told they were in a safe area. Then came the missiles. This is a real headline, guys. Think about this. They. Who's the they? The missiles came. From who? Who sent the missiles? We don't know. You read this kind of a headline, which unfortunately is what most people do when they're scrolling through their feeds or online or whatever. They just look at the headline. They were told they were in a safe area. Then came the missiles. I guess they just fell from space. Who knows where they came from? Compare that to Russia. Russia strikes children's hospital in deadly barrage across Ukraine. And by the way, Biden was very quick to condemn this brutal, Russian offensive and aggression inside of Ukraine. Very easy for him to condemn Russia on that, which he should, because they struck a children's hospital. But then think about comparing that to Israel and how he talks about that. Not even mild critiques at this point. Another comparison. Here from the New York Times. Carnage at Gaza school compound adds to mounting death toll at UN buildings. Again, who attacked? Who attacked? Comparing that again. Russia strikes Ukraine's railways. So they're not incapable of assigning blame in headlines. They're perfectly capable of it. If it's a U.S. State Department designated bad guy, then they'll assign blame perfectly well. They'll use all of the adjectives in the book. They're brutal. They're savages. It's a war crime, right? But then if it's a U.S. State Department designated ally, then suddenly that all flies out the window, right? And we've done the extensive comparisons in the media and the kind of language that they use, etc., etc. It will never not be disgusting. So there you have it. Some more, updates out of Gaza. I'll definitely be staying on this. I don't, unfortunately, think that it's going anywhere soon. There's been some talks of like a basic framework on some sort of a ceasefire deal, but at the same time, every time something like this happens, Benjamin Netanyahu steps in and sabotages it. So I'm not going to believe that there's any real hope for a ceasefire until one actually happens. And at the same time, we also have this looming threat that Israel could do what they did in Gaza to Lebanon as well, if it sparks off to a more direct and large-scale conflict with Hezbollah. So absolute nightmare, absolutely horrifying situation that our government is fully complicit in.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying